What if I told you that the reason you're drowning in student debt, the reason you can't buy a house, start a family, or build any wealth whatsoever, has nothing to do with your major, your choices, or even the cost of tuition? What if I told you it's because of a specific decision made by one man in 2 different decades who systematically stripped away your ability to ever escape? That man is Joe Biden. And between 1978 and 2005, he didn't just support legislation that made student loans nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. He championed it, defended it, and profited from it. Today, 43 million Americans owe $1.7 trillion in student debt. It's the only debt in America you cannot escape, even through bankruptcy. Medical bills? Gone. Credit card debt? Wiped clean. Gambling debts? Dischargeable. But your student loans? Those follow you to the grave. This isn't an accident. This is by design. And the architect wasn't some faceless corporation or abstract policy failure. It was a senator from Delaware who spent decades serving the credit card industry that funded his campaigns, employed his son, and wrote checks to his political machine. This is the story of how Joe Biden turned education debt into a life sentence. If you're fascinated by these economic stories you slept through, the hidden decisions that shaped the financial reality you're living in right now, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started uncovering the policies that broke the American dream. And share your memory of being able to afford college or watching your parents afford it in the comments below. Let's go back to the 1960s and early 1970s. Bankruptcy in America wasn't a dirty word. It was a safety net. If you got in over your head, whether through medical bills, bad business decisions, or yes, even student loans, you could file for bankruptcy, restructure, or eliminate your debts and get a fresh start. That was the entire purpose of the bankruptcy code, to give people a second chance. Student loans were relatively rare back then. Most public universities cost less than $500 a year in tuition. You could work a summer job and pay for an entire semester. But for those who did take out loans, bankruptcy was an option if things went sideways. The logic was simple. You're a young person trying to better yourself through education. If you can't find a job in your field, if the economy tanks, if life happens, you shouldn't be punished forever. You could declare bankruptcy, take the credit hit, and move on. This wasn't controversial. Both political parties understood that crushing young people with inescapable debt was economically insane. You want people to take risks, start businesses, buy homes, have kids. Debt peonage doesn't build a middle class. It destroys one. But by the mid-1970s, a narrative started creeping into Washington. The idea that students were abusing bankruptcy, that doctors and lawyers were racking up huge loans, graduating and immediately filing for bankruptcy to dodge repayment. There was virtually no evidence this was happening at any significant scale. Studies at the time showed that student loan discharge in bankruptcy was vanishingly rare, less than 1% of all bankruptcy cases. But the financial industry saw an opportunity, and they found their champion. Enter Joe Biden. Elected to the Senate in 1972 at age 29, Biden represented Delaware, a state that had become the credit card capital of America. Why Delaware? In 1981, the state passed laws eliminating interest rate caps and creating bank-friendly regulations. Suddenly, every major credit card company in America relocated to Wilmington. MBNA, one of the largest credit card issuers in the country, became Delaware's largest employer and Biden's largest campaign contributor. Between 1989 and 2000, MBNA gave Biden's campaigns over $200,000, more than any other contributor. His son, Hunter Biden, was hired by MBNA as a consultant in 1996, eventually earning $100,000 per year for vague, online banking services. When questioned about this during his 2008 vice presidential run, Biden bristled. He insisted there was no conflict of interest. Just a coincidence that Delaware's senator was also the banking industry's most reliable ally in Washington. Biden's ideology was straightforward. What's good for Delaware banks is good for America. He opposed interest rate caps on credit cards. He opposed consumer protections. And he became obsessed with bankruptcy abuse, the idea that Americans were gaming the system, living high on credit, and then skipping out on the bill. Never mind that most bankruptcies were caused by medical emergencies, job loss, or divorce. Biden bought the industry line hook, line, and sinker. And student loans? Those became his crusade. If banks couldn't collect on student debt through bankruptcy, they could charge whatever they wanted. Interest would compound forever. There would be no escape hatch. It was a lender's dream, and Biden was ready to deliver. In 1976, Congress amended the Higher Education Act, introducing the first restrictions on discharging student loans in bankruptcy. Federal loans made or guaranteed by the government couldn't be discharged unless they'd been in repayment for at least 5 years. The rationale? Prevent recent graduates from immediately filing bankruptcy. But the real hammer dropped in 1978 with the Bankruptcy Reform Act. Joe Biden voted for it. The bill made student loan discharge much harder, requiring borrowers to prove undue hardship, a vague, punishing standard that left interpretation up to individual judges. What's undue hardship? Nobody really knew. Total disability? Permanent poverty? A lifetime of minimum wage work? The ambiguity was the point. It created a barrier so high that most borrowers wouldn't even try. Here's what this meant in practice. You could be unemployed, homeless, unable to feed yourself, and a judge could still rule that discharging your student loans would be an undue hardship on the lender. Credit card debt from a Vegas binge? Dischargeable. Medical debt from a life-saving surgery? Dischargeable. Student loans you took out to become a teacher? Non-dischargeable. The 1978 law initially applied only to federal loans and loans from nonprofit institutions. Private student loans from banks could still be discharged. But that loophole wouldn't last. Biden and his banking allies were just getting started. The consequences were immediate. Students who hit hard times, recession, illness, family emergencies, found themselves trapped. Default rates started climbing. Collection agencies began hounding borrowers for decades. The government could garnish wages, seize tax refunds, even take Social Security checks. And bankruptcy, the escape valve that had existed for every other kind of debt, was now locked shut. Fast forward to 2005. Biden had spent nearly 3 decades in the Senate, and the banking industry wanted one final gift: the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act, or BAPCPA. This bill was a wish list for credit card companies. It made bankruptcy harder, more expensive, and more humiliating for ordinary Americans. Means testing, mandatory credit counseling, mountains of paperwork. The goal was to keep people out of bankruptcy court entirely, ensuring that debts and interest payments would continue forever. But the crown jewel of BAPCPA, it extended the bankruptcy exception to private student loans. Now, it didn't matter whether your loan came from the federal government, a nonprofit university, or a for-profit bank. None of it could be discharged without proving undue hardship. This was a massive giveaway to private lenders like Sallie Mae, who could now issue student loans with zero risk. If borrowers couldn't pay, the lenders didn't care. The debt was permanent. Bankruptcy wouldn't touch it. Joe Biden didn't just vote for this bill. He was one of its leading champions. He gave speeches on the Senate floor defending it. He dismissed critics as soft on bankruptcy abuse. When progressives like Senator Ted Kennedy and civil rights groups begged him to reconsider, Biden dug in. He claimed the bill was about fairness, about responsibility, about making sure people paid what they owed. What he didn't mention? MBNA had given his campaigns nearly $200,000 over the years. His son was still cashing checks from the company. Delaware's banking industry was writing this legislation, and Biden was the pen. The bill passed in March 2005. President George W. Bush signed it into law a month later. And just like that, an entire generation of Americans lost their last escape route from student debt. Let's talk about what Biden's legislation actually did to real people. In 1980, total student loan debt in America was $10 billion. Today, it's $1.7 trillion. That's a 17,000% increase. Why? Because when lenders have zero risk, they have zero reason to exercise restraint. Tuition skyrocketed. Universities spent billions on luxury dorms, climbing walls, and bloated administrations because they knew students could borrow whatever it took. And banks handed out loans to 18-year-olds like candy because even if those kids never found a job, the debt would follow them forever. The result? 43 million Americans are drowning. The average borrower owes $37,000, but millions owe 6 figures. Graduate students in medicine, law, and social work are leaving school with $200,000, $300,000, even $500,000 in debt. The interest compounds faster than they can pay it down. A 25-year-old who borrowed $50,000 could easily owe $80,000 by age 35, even after making payments every month. And here's the kicker. These borrowers can't buy homes. They can't start businesses. They delay marriage, delay having children, delay every major financial milestone because they're shackled to debt they will never, ever escape. The home ownership rate for millennials is the lowest in modern history. The birth rate is plummeting. The economy is suffering because an entire generation has been turned into debt serfs. Meanwhile, older borrowers are being destroyed. There are Americans in their 60s and 70s who are still paying off student loans, or worse, having their Social Security checks garnished because they defaulted. They'll die with this debt. It doesn't go away. Not through bankruptcy, not through old age, not through anything short of total disability or death. And who benefits? The loan servicers, the collection agencies, the banks that securitized this debt and sold it to investors. They're making billions in interest off loans that can never be escaped. It's the perfect trap, and Joe Biden built it. So why does this matter now? Why should you care about a bill from 2005 or a vote from 1978? Because you are living in the wreckage. Every single day. In ways you probably don't even realize. If you're under 40, there's a decent chance you have student loans. Maybe you thought you were making a smart investment. Everyone told you to go to college, that it was the ticket to the middle class. Your parents, your teachers, your guidance counselors all said the same thing. Borrow whatever it takes because you'll make it back with your degree. And here's what Joe Biden's laws mean for you. You can't escape. You can lose your job, get divorced, have a medical emergency, declare bankruptcy, lose everything, and those loans will still be there, waiting, compounding, growing. You can't save. You can't invest. You can't take risks. You're living paycheck to paycheck, and you will be for the next decade, if nothing goes wrong. But things always go wrong. Your car breaks down. You get sick, and insurance doesn't cover everything. You lose your job in a recession. And when that happens, your student loans don't pause. The interest keeps piling up. Let's talk about families. The birth rate in America has fallen to its lowest level in recorded history. We're now at 1.6 children per woman, below the replacement rate of 2.1. Why? Student debt is a massive factor. Studies show that people with student loans delay marriage by an average of 3 years. They delay having children by an average of 4 years. Many decide not to have kids at all because they can't afford it. Think about what that means. You're 30 years old. You've been paying on your loans for 8 years. You're in a stable relationship. You want kids, but you're still drowning in debt. Childcare costs $500 a month. Diapers, formula, doctor visits. It's another $500. You can't afford it. So you wait. You wait until you're 35, 37, 40. And by then, fertility becomes an issue. Or the relationship has fallen apart because of financial stress. Or you've just given up on the idea entirely. This is demographic collapse driven by policy. Joe Biden's laws didn't just trap people in debt, they prevented them from starting families, which means fewer future taxpayers, fewer consumers, fewer workers. It's an economic death spiral. And let's talk about entrepreneurship, because this is where the damage gets really ugly. Small business creation has plummeted among young people. In 1996, people under 30 made up about 35% of new business owners. Today, less than 20%. Why? Because starting a business requires risk, and you can't take risks when you're shackled to debt you can never discharge. Let's say you have an idea. You want to start a company. You need $20,000 to get it off the ground, but you already have $60,000 in student loans. No bank will lend to you. You're over-leveraged. You can't crowdfund enough. Your parents can't help. So you don't start the business. The idea dies. The jobs you would have created never exist. The innovation never happens. Multiply that by millions of people, and you see why the economy is stagnating. Here's the final insult. Older Americans are getting destroyed too. There are 2.2 million Americans over the age of 60 who still have student loan debt. Some of them borrowed for their own education decades ago and never escaped. Others co-signed for their kids or took out Parent Plus loans, which are federal loans with interest rates as high as 8.05%. These seniors are having their Social Security checks garnished. The government is legally allowed to take up to 15% of their Social Security to pay student loans. We're talking about people living on $1,100 a month who are losing $180 to loan payments. They're choosing between medications and food, and they will die with this debt. It doesn't end. So when I say Joe Biden's bankruptcy laws destroyed the economy, I'm not exaggerating. He created a system where 43 million people are locked in permanent debt, unable to buy homes, start families, launch businesses, or retire with dignity. He turned education, the thing that's supposed to be the great equalizer, into a life sentence. And he did it knowingly, repeatedly, while taking money from the very banks that profited. The $1.7 trillion student debt crisis isn't a natural disaster. It's not bad luck. It's not the result of irresponsible borrowers or lazy millennials. It's the deliberate consequence of specific policy choices made by a specific person over decades. But here's the thing. Awareness is growing. More bankruptcy judges are starting to grant discharges under the undue hardship standard, recognizing how absurdly punishing these laws have become. The Biden administration, yes, the same Joe Biden, tried to implement widespread forgiveness programs, though many were blocked by courts. Some states are creating their own student debt relief programs, and there's bipartisan momentum building in Congress to restore bankruptcy protections for student loans. You're also getting smarter about this. Enrollment in for-profit colleges has collapsed as people wise up to predatory lending. More students are choosing community colleges and state schools over expensive private universities. Income-driven repayment plans, while imperfect, have given millions of borrowers some breathing room. And younger generations are demanding accountability, asking the hard questions about why college costs so much and why debt follows you forever when every other obligation can be discharged. The system Biden built is starting to crack, not because politicians suddenly grew a conscience, but because the economic damage is too massive to ignore. When millions of people can't buy homes, start businesses, or have children, the entire economy suffers. Lenders are starting to realize that squeezing borrowers forever isn't sustainable. Banks can't profit if their customers are too broke to exist. Change is possible. It requires political will, public pressure, and voters who understand how we got here. That's why telling this story matters. You can't fix a problem if you don't know who caused it. And now you know. Joe Biden spent decades building this trap, but it doesn't have to last forever. That's the trap. That's the $1.7 trillion legacy, and that's why you're struggling today. But now that you see it, you can fight it. If stories like this, where we uncover the economic events that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, fascinate you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel because we're just getting started with these financial, educational mysteries.